I'm going to also take you into chapter 2 really quick. Okay, and chapter 2 talks a little bit about the founding fathers. And let me set this up real quick. Now, if we look at the original kind of the hierarchy of our society during the revolutionary time, obviously we have black slaves at the bottom, indentured servants above that, maybe blue collar workers above that, and then we have some farmers, and then above that we have the elitists, which controlled society much like it does now. We originally had something called the Articles of Confederation, and it was more of a kind of a treaty between a bunch of different individual states. And the main government's role in this was for um, them to provide security from outside forces, but then the states would be responsible for other things like trade and taxation and all that stuff like that. So under the original articles, the powers delegated to the U.S. were, declaring war, making treaties, sending and receiving ambassadors. Very, very kind of analogous to what we have today. Um, Powers of the states were regulating commerce and levying taxes. As we'll see, the Articles of Confederation has some defects, and one of the things that came out of the defects of the Articles of Confederation was the regulation of commerce and the ability to maybe regulate what commerce can do, and as far as maybe generating revenue for the federal government. So there was something called Shays' Rebellion that the book talks about, which exposed the government weaknesses. Um, Shays' Rebellion was basically a debtors' revolt where a bunch of debt holders took possession of an armory in Massachusetts, which in a sense scared and exposed government weaknesses. So, as a kind of a step to rectify a lot of these situations, Congress decided to convene, and instead of revising the Articles of Confederation, they just wrote a whole new constitution themselves. So if we look at George Washington and his prestige and some of the founders' governing experience, we could see that a lot of them were already active in government. So they were also already at the apex of the elitist structure during this time. Most of them had been educated at Ivy League colleges or in England. A lot of them had legal training. They were also trained in history and classical and British history as well. They were wealthy. Hamilton was the exception. Hamilton came from modest backgrounds, but the rest of the founding fathers were at the apex of the elite structure here in the United States. They also were not just loyal to their own states; they were also had a good sense of nationalism. And let's not, nationalism is a word that it kind of gets confused in the field of political science. Um, it sometimes it's used as as a word analogous to maybe patriotism, or you could use it as the other extreme that where we have Nazi Party was a nationalist party at times, and they Nazi Germany had a high level of nationalism, which in a sense can also mean you might sacrifice some of your own personal views for the common good. But the founders did believe in a strong national government to exercise its will directly on the people. We talked about classical liberalism and social contract theory. Now, we also have a republican form of government in addition to the democracy that we have here, where we had a representative, responsible, and non hereditary form of government where we would elect people that were wise and prudent and should be able to make informed decisions with regards to representing us in Congress. Also believed in limited government. And when the question of representation came up, two plans were originally introduced. The first was the Virginia Plan, which looked at a two-house legislature where the lower house was to be chosen by citizens of the states based off of population, and the upper house was chosen by the first house. Now, if any of us knows a little bit about European history or the UK, you're going to notice that the Virginia plan kind of is similar to what the UK has now as part of their parliament. The other plan introduced was the New Jersey plan, where we had one vote per state, unicameral House legislature, and a separate executive and judiciary, and the Congress was also given the power to tax and regulate commerce. What came out of this was the Connecticut Compromise, where we have a two-house legislature based on population. The upper would be equal, 2 senators per state. So this is kind of the compromise that we ran into, and it shows what the effect or the form of government that came out of that. Slavery was also a questionable thing at the time, and how was slavery going to be handled for the purposes of representation? Obviously, they had higher numbers in the South. If you counted, slaves during that time, for the purposes of representation, in order to appease the southern states, slaves were counted as 3/5 of a person through the 3/5 Compromise. Congress also prohibited the slave trade, but not before 1808, and Article 4, Section 2 of the Constitution guaranteed the return of escaped slaves. It was also made under the Constitution that taxes couldn't be charged on other states if you are exporting or importing goods. There shouldn't bear no tax or duty. So if I am sending something to Florida, I shouldn't have to pay any type of tariff or duty on that merchandise. Congress was also granted the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises. And as we'll see with the 16th Amendment, we'll see how the government developed the concept of the IRS and federal income tax on our paychecks. Also, the Constitution sought to protect money and credit. Article 1, Section 8 enables Congress to protect money and property. We have bankruptcy laws, which are laws that are regulated by the federal government. Coining money, fixing weights, and a fixed standard of weights and measures, meaning that a pound in California is supposed to be a pound in Georgia, those type of things. Punishing counterfeiting, establishing a post office, and also respecting copyright and patent laws. Also created the military. Article 1, Section 8, and Article 2 provisions centralized diplomatic and military affairs. Prohibited states from entering into treaties or even engaging in war. Have to have the federal government, specifically Congress, to do that. So another important thing is Article 6 made the laws of Congress supersede laws of the states. So there is currently one instance right now that it really comes off the top of my head when we talk about laws that are different between the federal government and between the states. Our marijuana law here in California, Prop 64, which passed the legalization of marijuana for recreational use. Obviously, under state law and under the 10th Amendment, California introduced those laws through the direct initiative process. But since marijuana is still illegal under federal law will supersede state law, and if the federal government wanted to come into California and shut down dispensaries, they would be in the right to do so. So a little bit more of an idea about republicanism in the House. People elected only to the House serve a 2-year term. At that time, state legislatures elected U.S. senators to 6-year terms. Federal judges were appointed to life, and electors selected as state legislature chose selected the president through the electoral college, which we'll talk about. This second point here has changed with the 17th Amendment, and we'll get into talking about that, where Now we vote for senators. Originally, state legislatures used to vote for senators. Now, one thing to kind of take into account was the concept of separation of powers and checks and balances. As we go through each branch of government, we'll talk a little bit about the checks that each branch will have. Like, the president can veto laws of Congress, which is a check. Congress can override that veto, which is another check. And the judiciary branch can declare a law made by Congress or a law made by the president unconstitutional. Congress can pass a constitutional amendment if the Supreme Court declares something unconstitutional. They can make it constitutional by creating a constitutional amendment. And we'll look at some of those things as we go through the rest of this course. Bill of Rights was eventually introduced after the original Constitution was drafted, which all gave us protections and freedoms from the government. Okay, so what I want you guys to do, I'll do another video for chapters 3 and the Direct Democracy chapter a little bit later in the week. What I want you guys to do now is to take a look at 10 and look at Federalist 10 and Federalist 51. Remember, Federalist 10 is going to focus on the concept of factions and Madison's belief that factions in any type of government are going to happen no matter what. And Federalist 51 focuses on those separation of powers that we talked about and how Madison felt that in order to have checks and balances on each system, that would ensure that one branch of government is not any stronger than the others. Okay, so we'll do another video of chapter 3 and Direct Democracy chapter in a couple of days, and I will see you then. Okay, thanks a lot.